The wind howled like a living creature, pressing against the windows of Maria's small apartment. She sat at her desk, staring at the blinking cursor on her laptop screen. The deadline for her article loomed closer, but her thoughts remained blank. Maria had always been good at meeting deadlines, but tonight, her mind refused to cooperate. The room felt stifling, the shadows deeper than usual. She blamed her nerves. The events of the past week had been unsettling. First, the feeling of being watched, and then the strange noises outside her door late at night. Yesterday, her bedroom window, despite being on the third floor, had somehow become unlatched. And even though she was sure she had locked it, she tried to convince herself it was her imagination or carelessness. But the doubt lingered. Maria leaned back and rubbed her eyes. Maybe a walk would clear her head. She grabbed her coat and stepped into the cold night air. The streets were quiet, the usual city hum muted by the approaching storm. She walked aimlessly, her hands buried in her pockets, her head bowed against the chill. The feeling returned, the uncanny sensation of being watched. She glanced over her shoulder. The street was empty, save for a flickering street lamp and a stray cat darting into an alley. Still, the unease clung to her, like a weight pressing on her chest. She quickened her pace. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. She stopped and pulled it out, expecting a message from her editor or a friend. Instead, it was a photo. Her heart sank. It showed her walking down the street, head down, unmistakably in her coat. No message accompanied the image, just the picture. Maria spun around quickly, scanning her surroundings. Nothing. The street was deserted. Clutching her phone tightly, she hurried back home, her breath fogging in the frigid air. At her apartment door, she fumbled nervously with the keys until she managed to get inside and lock the door behind her. She immediately drew the curtains and searched her entire apartment. Nothing seemed out of place, but the sensation of being watched was stronger than ever. She tried calling the police, but as soon as she mentioned the photo, the line crackled and went dead. Staring at her phone in disbelief, she wondered if it was a glitch, or if someone had deliberately cut the connection. Her heart raced as she sat in the middle of her living room. Clutching the phone, then came the knock. At first, it was faint, barely audible over the howling wind. She held her breath, straining to listen. The knock came again, louder this time. It was not from the door. It was coming from the window. Maria's head snapped toward the window, her eyes fixed on the curtains. A silhouette was unmistakable, standing motionless behind them. Her chest tightened, and she forced herself to move. And she grabbed the nearest object, a heavy book, and crept toward the window. The silhouette did not move as she approached. Her hand trembled as she grasped the curtain and yanked it open. The window was empty. There was no one there. The street outside was as still and deserted as before. She stumbled back, her heart pounding. Her phone vibrated again. Another photo. This time, it showed her standing at the window, curtain in hand, her face pale with fear. She screamed and threw the phone across the room. It shattered against the wall, but the buzzing did not stop. Now it was coming from her laptop. The screen flickered to life, showing a video of her living room. She was in the frame, standing frozen, staring at the laptop. The video glitched, and a figure appeared in the background. Its features were blurry, its shape distorted like a shadow given form. In the video, it moved closer, but when Maria spun around, the room was empty. The screen went black. Her breathing was ragged as she backed into a corner. This could not be real. It simply could not be real. She needed to get out. She grabbed her keys and coat, left abandoned by the door, and fled into the night. The streets now felt different. The shadows were heavier, and every sound seemed amplified. She kept glancing over her shoulder, but no one was there. Her footsteps echoed, but it began to sound as if there were more footsteps than her own, a dozen pairs trailing her. She ducked into an alley. pressing herself against the cold brick wall, trying to steady her breath. Her phone was gone, her laptop unreachable, and there was no one she could call. She was completely alone. Or was she? A scraping noise to her left made her jump. It was the sound of metal on stone. Squinting into the darkness, she could not see anything. Then, out of the corner of her eye, there was movement, and a shadow peeled away from the others, gliding unnaturally across the ground before rising into a vaguely human shape. The figure stood motionless, its edges undefined but terrifyingly present. Maria's body refused to obey her. Her limbs were paralyzed by a primal fear, and the head of the figure tilted as if studying her. Then it spoke, its voice echoing directly inside her mind. "You called me." Maria shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "No, I didn't. I don't even know who you are." The shadow moved closer, its form stretching and twisting as it loomed over her. "You called me, when you were afraid, when you watched, when you let the darkness in." She tried to run, but the shadow was faster. It was everywhere at once, engulfing her, smothering her with its presence. Her screams were muffled as it whispered terrible secrets into her ears, about cruel truths that warped her perception of reality. And then she woke up. She was in her apartment, sitting at her desk, under the article half written on the screen before her. Her phone vibrated beside her, but when she checked, there were no strange photos, no messages. The room was quiet, normal. Was it a dream? It felt too real, the terror too vivid. She stood and walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside. The street was empty, just as it had been. Then came the knock. Quiet at first, then louder. This time, it was from the door. Slowly, Linda May, she turned around, her heart sinking. She did not know what to expect, but she knew she could not ignore it. The door creaked as she opened it, and no one was there. Her phone vibrated in her hand. Another photo. This time it showed her standing at the door, staring into the hallway. Behind her, Maria, the shadow rose. Maria dropped the phone, but it did not matter. The shadows in the room deepened, moving with intent toward her. She stumbled back, her scream swallowed by the encroaching darkness. When the neighbors called the police the next morning, they found the apartment empty. Her phone lay on the floor, displaying a single photo, a dark, empty room with a faint silhouette in the corner. Maria was never seen again. Yet sometimes late at night, residents swore they heard faint knocking at their windows, followed by a shadow lingering just beyond their sight.